evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and in a moment, Binman will be presenting his long-form stats file show covering last week's match against the Hawks, as well as previewing our upcoming clash against the Western Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium. Don't forget to check out my interview with D's midfielder Tom Sparrow. I had a chat with him about the breakout year that he's having, the journey that brought him to this point, the challenges along the way, and what it means to already have had his name forever etched in Melbourne Football Club history as part of the club's drought-breaking premiership side. The Demonland podcast will return live on Monday night at 8 p.m. to dissect the upcoming match against the Bulldogs at Marvel. If you want to listen to the show live, then head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8 p.m. But now, here's Binman with the stats files.
Thank you, Andy, for that warm introduction, and much respect for that interview you did yesterday with Tom Sparrow. Terrific job, terrific interview. He's such an impressive young man. If you haven't listened to it out there in Demonland, check it out. Terrific interview. Well done, Andy. G'day to Demonland fans. I am Binman. It is Thursday as I'm recording this. I'm going to try and get it a little bit earlier. I know I set it out on Friday. It'll obviously be there on Friday if you want to listen to it. But I had some feedback that it would be good, if possible, to do it a bit earlier in the week in order to have more time to be able to listen to the show, which I've tried to do this week. So I'm doing it on Thursday as we speak, Thursday afternoon. The teams aren't in yet. They'll probably drop while I'm recording this. So I'm flying a little bit blind on that front. But I'll do my best to cover off that. I will I'll review the terrific win over the Hawks that we had on the weekend. Great win. I'll review my preview of that game last week, is how I'll structure that up in terms of why we won that game. Terrific win by the boys. And, of course, I'll preview our big game against the Dogs at Docklands Stadium on Sunday at 3:15. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording this, with the Boonwurrung people, and the traditional owners of the lands on which our listeners are listening today, and pay my respects to any elders past and present and emerging leaders who are listening into one of the hundreds, dozens, several people listening to the Stats File preview pod today, or tomorrow, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, hopefully before Sunday when the game, it's going to be superfluous after that. So I'll try to do it a little bit earlier in the week. I'm trying to, make it useful. Still sort of try and find my feet, really, to be honest, and see what format works best. And some have been shorter, some have been longer. But one of the things in terms of doing it a bit earlier is a little bit less time to prepare. It takes a fair while to sort of drill down. So apologies if I missed some stuff and it isn't as detailed as it otherwise might be. Just a couple of things I thought, just to frame things. I thought, I've discussed this before, but I just thought it would be worthwhile just giving some information about where the data I get from, where are the stats that I'm getting them from. Just because I think that it sometimes can be a little bit confusing, all the different data points out there, and obviously I rattle through quite a few as I'm going through the show. So, and I think it's important to be able to get a sense of, being able to check them and look at them. Predominantly the data, the stats that I speak to on the show, both on this show, the preview pod, and on the main Demonland podcast on Monday night, is taken from Wheelo Ratings, so wheeloratings.com, AFL, and the Wheelo's, it's a terrific site. It's a really navigable. I really encourage anyone who's interested in trying to understand footy and how games are shaping up, what they might look like, preview, review, and also trends in the game. It's just a terrific site. It's really, really user-friendly. It's very similar. The model that Wheelo uses is very similar to the model Champion Data uses. So it's not Champion Data, but it's a very similar model. And so the data is similar to, in most respects, maybe a little bit different to the Champion Data, which is sometimes where, some of the numbers that I speak to might be a little bit different when you hear them in other contexts when it's Champion Data. One example of that is the player rating stats that I talk about a lot, in terms of individual player ratings, but also the equity ratings, the aggregating all the player ratings up into an equity model to see where the points are across a team around ball winning specifically, and use of ball is the methodology for that is very similar to the methodology for the AFL player ratings. The AFL player ratings was developed by the AFL with with Champion Data, so it uses Champion Data inputs. It's a Champion Data system. As I understand it, I think this is right. I'm right in saying is that Champion Data also have their own player rating systems, and they have a little bit more granularity and some more drill down statistical categories. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a difference between the player ratings that I speak to for a game and total and those sorts of things in the Champion Data. So I put that out there. One of the interesting things around Champion Data too. So the other place I get data from, and this is why I'm really saying this is sometimes around, is sort of hoovering up data from and stats from a whole bunch of places across the media landscape. In particular, Daniel Hoyne is probably the only show I regularly listen to or make sure I try to catch every week. Tuesdays on SEN. It's terrific. So often I'll note down his stats, and he obviously Champion Data. ESPN Footy Podcast has a fella from Champion Data on it as well, and they speak to a lot of Champion Data stats. So I grab data from there too sometimes, First Crack and other bits and bobs on different shows. One of the things is a little bit sort of confusing with those stats, and it frustrates me a little bit in terms of how stats are used in the media. Without context, it's sometimes of not great value, and they pick out a specific one as if it's, the commentators or analysts will often pick out one sort of isolated stat and then build a whole narrative around it. And for me, I think that's not a great way of using stats to analyse games of footy. It's really about triangulating different data points and then, using different data points to arrive at a conclusion. But the data that they speak to, and one of the other frustrating things, and it really, really, really burns my bacon, is a lot of the data that, for instance, First Cracked Joey Montagna might speak to, or David King or Daniel Hoyne, is, as I said, is Champion Data statistics and data that are all generated for the clubs. So the clubs are the main stakeholder for Champion Data, and then media presumably buys or has a license to use that as well. And so it's all a bit sort of secret squirrel, and it just drives me nuts. Is put it all out there, put it out in the public domain, let people engage with it and think about it. Obviously, it's proprietary, but so like they come up with these numbers that you can't really double check, or you can't sort of, take it away and think, well, what does that mean? Because there's no central spot for the public to look at this stuff. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the fact that all of the talk has been about us being a transition team, all of that overlap handball, and it's really missing the woods for the trees, or the trees for the woods, whichever way that is, in the sense that it's really hiding the fact that we're a territory team, as I've been banging on we're a contest team. And one of the data points that reinforces that has come up a couple of weeks that I spoke to, which is, and it's an example of what I mean by the challenge or the problem when this data is locked up and you don't have access to it. But we're number one in the AFL for retention from long down the line kicks. And we're number one in the AFL for long down the line kicks full stop, I think, or we're number two behind Freo. And we're number one in the AFL for scoring from long down the line kicks. Now, I don't actually know what the definition of long down the line kicks is. There is no central spot for me to check that out, which is really frustrating. I presume long down the line kicks, 40, 50 metre kicks towards goals is what I'm assuming. But it's important because it speaks to our game style, kick it to a contest, bring it down in front of that contest, go for your life, win that contest. And that's really how we're playing footy, for all the talk about, how exciting we are off the halfback flank. In fact, it's got so much, it's got so many similarities to how we were playing in 21. It really does, win the contest, play for territory, super, super fit, fitter than and I'll speak to that in my review of the game, super, super fit, wound up, fitter than our opposition, overrunning teams in the last quarter. Put it high pressure, high intensity, cracking the opposition, scoring in bursts like we did in 21. But like in 21, where we were clearly the fittest side come the finals, we were rolling over the top of teams late in quarters and in the second half. And we're doing that again on the back of our contest, of our intensity and our incredible fitness, but also the athletic profile of our team, which is just awesome. And it's what King has built. It is really fundamental to his game plan, that running power, as I've talked about all season. So just in terms of that club-specific stuff, as I said, so there's a whole bunch of those data. You'll hear them. So, for instance, Melbourne, I saw in first crack, Melbourne are resurgent demons, 26, where points for is 3. Well, that's publicly available. Chain to score was 7th. Defensive 50 to inside 50. Some of that's available on Willow ratings, calculated in a similar way, which is point-to-point calculation. So each time there's an intervention, that's like a chain. And then in a way, for me, the data is a descriptor of what happens as opposed to isolated bits of information. They were actually very bad examples of champion data stuff that's locked up. So a better one would be Marcus Bontempelli. So, for instance, he's 90th in clearance into effective clearances in the AFL of the top 100 clearance players. He's 99th effective clearance into score. That data is not publicly available, which is really frustrating. So, another one is that per 100 stoppages between rounds 1 and 4, the strike rate for in terms of scoring for the Dogs was ranked number 6 in the AFL. Between rounds 5 and 10, it's number 17. So it'd be great, AFL, if you happen to be listening to this, pull your head out and get all of this data out there. Just finally, a quick sort of comment about AI. I found it fascinating. So one of the things I do listen to, I've really enjoyed Simpson in the media this year, and I really enjoy, not 360 generally, but I really like Simpson and Longmire, doing that coaching bit. I think it's on the Monday night. Really fascinating insight, and they often use vision to describe, to show, to explain what they're saying, which I find really helpful as well. But he has been talking a little bit about AI and the use of AI, which apparently is growing amongst teams, particularly sort of among the coaching staff. I find that really interesting. He talks about the fact of using AI live in games, or also using AI to determine matchups, for instance. So he uses, today I heard him talking about using the example of I forget the Adelaide Crows player he was talking about, but the data showed, for instance, might show that one particular player is central to a team scoring in a particular quarter. So that maybe gives the information on who you should lock down, as opposed to just locking down the stars based on the disposals and raw numbers. So it's a really interesting space to watch. I know Sam Mitchell is apparently, by all accounts, he's really invested in using AI, both post-match analysis, pre-match planning, and in-game use. I heard I went to a presentation or an event that King spoke at was fascinating, and he really emphasised how much he embraces analytics. And he said that from his perspective, Melbourne has the incredible analytics. The team there are phenomenal, and he puts a huge emphasis on it. He said at this presentation, and you just need to hear his interviews, even post-match presser. He's all over key data, which loops back around to champion data. I mean, I understand to an extent why champion data does lock up a lot of this information, because the clubs use it not for entertainment like it is in the media often. The clubs use it for their planning, for their strategy, to indicate whether their game plan's working. So where, for instance, I've used that example of the long down the line, retention from long down the line kicks. It's clearly our strategy to do that. You just need to watch all the goals from the match on the weekend. Often they're not even going for the mark. They are flat handing it down to in front of the contest, and then we win that contest and we score from there. If that's central to your coaching philosophy and game plan, well, you need a measure to determine whether you're doing it effectively or not. And so the club then says, well, champion data, please design us a measure that gives us that intel, and demonstrates what that information is about in terms of how clubs use it. But nonetheless, it is super frustrating not having access to it. So, I thought I'd just provide that context. So Willow Ratings is the predominant one. All sorts of other sort of sources where I, grab it, and sort of filters around and rolls around in my head. In terms of today, I'm going to do a review of the Hawks. I'm going to race through the equity numbers and the three phases of footy, and then I'm going to sort of look about why we won and what did I get right in the preview last week. And then I'll, of course, the next after that, we'll go to a preview of the D's versus Dogs. I'll take a bit of a different approach for that one, as opposed to how we will win and what we need to do. I'm going to do the opposite this week, and what do the Dogs need to do to beat us? So I will get to that after I've run quickly through the review of our fantastic win over the Hawks. We're going to fly through, as I said, equity points. I'm going to track this all season. Really impressive, our ball winning equity points. So just quickly, equity points are is an aggregation of, in this sense, is an aggregation of player ratings. Players earn player rating points for every action they have in the game, or lose points as the case may be. And it relates to scoreboard impact, which is one of the reasons why the rating system is so good. So, for instance, ball winning is 118.6 in this game. And our disposal, which is better than theirs, was 113, and that shows when we win the ball, we're more impactful than them. But when you look at the old measure, or a sort of a less nuanced measure, its disposal efficiency is almost the same. But it's not really about how efficient you are necessarily. It's about how impactful you are with each of those kicks, for instance. So equity points, we were plus 8.4 points for pre-clearance equity points. Post-clearance, we totally smashed them. This was really critical for the win. I thought post-clearance, 159.9 of our points, aggregate points, were earned in post-clearance to their 132.3. That's plus 27. That's massive. For context, we're averaging 134.6 equity points for post-clearance this year. That's so 25 and a bit more than our season average. Huge for this game. Just shows how wound up we were, and it shows the wisdom of how we conserved our energy last week. What's really notable, though, is they were 132, which isn't too bad, because the season average is 127.2. So for AFL average is 127.2. So we were 32 points above the equity points above the AFL average for post clearance. That is really impressive footy, and that was a big factor in the win. Just a sort of bit of context: 159.9 equity points. All 23 players aggregated up for that score. Against our average in 25 was 115. So extraordinary jump there. So in terms of winning the ball, this is something that's one of the benefits of tracking this all season. Is it's really surprised me how well we're doing in terms of ball winning. So these are, winning the contest, essentially winning the footy when the ball's in contest. The key is not just winning it; is the how much impact do you get from winning it. And in this game, it was fairly level. We were plus 5.4 for ball winning equity points, 118.6 to 113. Again, the AFL average is 110, so we're above AFL average for winning the ball. And we're averaging 113 this season, was 112 last season. And it indicates that despite the loss of Clas and track, we are winning the ball better and being more impactful when we do win it than we were last season. And that wasn't the thinking going in. Everyone was worried about the fact that we've lost two of our key inside bulls, and it really hasn't hurt us in the way that many thought it might. Ball use was incredible in this game in terms of the difference. They're one of the best kicking teams in the AFL. We took that away from them. I'll speak to that in the why we won section, but our ball use equity points was 91.6. The AFL average for ball use equity points is 51.7. That is unbelievable. They had 59 points, so above AFL average, but we were plus 32.7 for the impact of how we use the ball. And again, that was a big factor in the win. Just for context, this season we're averaging 63.3 equity points for using the ball. AFL average last year was 39.6, which is no surprise at all given how terrible our kicking was last year. And again, that's the big factor in that is, to be honest, Clas and Track not being in the side, not being in our best 23, because both were awful last year in terms of their use of the footy. Three phases of the footy: defence, offence, and defence, contest, and offence. In terms of some of the key defensive stats that jumped out, I'll speak to a little bit more of some of these when in the how we won or why we won. Intercepts, +2 for intercepts, -1 only for intercept marks, +8 for tackles. We had 8 tackles inside 50. They had 7. And defensive one-on-one losses 18.2% of the time to 20. So we matched them defensively, very, very similar. The tackles number +8 was impressive, though they're fairly low tackle numbers. In terms of territory, this was really interesting, and it speaks to the game style. I'll try to unpack that a little bit later. Really, I sat at the top of the Ponsford stand. Just such a fantastic view. I really love it. And this game was perfect for it because it was a very tactical game, but the patterns of running and where we were running and were really fascinating. And we spread the ball and used the width of the MCG much more than I thought we would. And we were much more deliberate in our ball movement up the field than I thought we would be. Our best quarter, obviously, on the scoreboard was our last quarter. We smashed them. It was only in our forward half in that last quarter, 44% of the time. For the match, it was 48-52. So 50-50 is really the way footy's being played at the moment. That's sort of, I guess the benchmark. But they really, despite us smashing them on the scoreboard in that last quarter, looking by far the better team. We looked miles better than them in that last quarter. It was in their forward half 56% of the time, which I found fascinating. Similarly, I thought we played well in that first quarter as well, and we certainly matched them. It was in our forward half 43% of the time, in their forward half 57% of the time. So really interesting that, particularly that last quarter, that we were so effective scoring. Despite the fact that we didn't win territory, they dominated territory in that quarter, in that last quarter. We moved the ball super well from the back half in that last quarter, less so in the other quarters. In terms of our contest work, +11 for contested possessions, 144 to 133. AFL average this season's 129. Smashed them for ground ball gets, +14. Smashed them for post-clearance ground ball gets, +12. Huge. That's really a big factor, and that was one of the things that Mitchell was bemoaning in his post-match presser about their lack of intensity. It'd be interesting to watch tonight's game. One expects they'll be very fierce at the footy tonight down in Tassie when they're playing the Crows. Post clearance, contested possessions, +9. Contested marks, almost even. We had 8, they had 9. AFL average contested mark is 8.7, as I've said every week for the last few weeks. Pretty hard to take a contested mark in footy these days. It's 8.7. There's been bugger all wet games, so it's really hard to clunk contested marks in footy at the moment. Clearances, this was a big feature of the game, or was certainly it was a big factor in the game, I should say, leading in and as it turned out to be. But just in raw numbers, not scores from clearances and stoppages, which is really the key thing, though winning clearances is important in terms of winning territory. Total clearances, we were just +4 for total clearances. We had 5 more centre clearances than them, +5, 17 to 12. And around the ground, they had 1 more stoppage clearance than us, so 21, and they had 22. We had first possessions 40 times. They had first possessions 33 times, so +7 for that was good. And they had us for first possession to clearance percentage, 81.8% to 77.5%. In terms of our wear-out contested possessions, it's interesting, we were +11 for contested possessions inside our D50. Really speaks to the attitude we brought into this game. I was really impressed with our defensive unit. I was really impressed with our system down back. Really impressed with how Howes went about it. Obviously, Disco too. It's just awesome to have Bowie back. He's just slotted straight back in there like he missed no footy altogether. I'm really loving Colt's work defensively as well. So +11 inside our D50 is huge. They only had 20 contested possessions inside their D50, +4 for contested possessions inside 50. Post clearance, I said the total was we're +9. That was made up predominantly of loose ball gets, 59 to 52. So, we were running onto the ball, and I'll speak to that in the why we won section. But, what was really notable early on in this game is how better we were running across the ground, and it felt like we were deliberately looking to maximise that benefit or that advantage we had over the Hawks in a way that I didn't fully expect us to. That's stretching the ground, that using the width of the ground that I was talking about. But this has sort of picked up in loose ball gets. We were getting onto those loose ball that to me sort of suggests we were running harder. The ball gets out into space and we get it 59 to 52. That in terms of +7 for loose ball gets. Centre bounce attendances were interesting. So Tom Sparrow had 26, Jack Steele had 25. This is not including the rucks. No one else rucked again, bar one. Rivers had to take a ruck when I think Maxie had to go off, or there was a bit of a muddle up and he didn't get to the contest. But Trent Rivers, I didn't think he would go into the midfield. I'll speak to that a little bit later. He did, and he was really impressive, I have to say, and just slotted in and took Windsor's place no problem. So Sparrow, Steele, Trent Rivers, Cozzy, Cade Chandler, and Bailey Laurie also had 2 CBAs. As a friend of mine said, shout out Egon, CBAs, they probably shouldn't be called CBAs anymore because they're not centre bounces, they're attendances, they're centre throw-up attendances. So what's that? CTUAs. So I think Champion Data better get onto that and change their titles or the names for their that stat at least. Most pressure points, Cade Chandler, what a performance by him. Tom Sparrow's been in the top 3 for pressure plays all season. Bailey Laurie was next, speaks to how important he's become in terms of that role he plays, both the pressure he provides, but the up and down the ground running. Because he had a quiet game in terms of sort of impact, I think his player rating was around 10 points, 10.5 or something. Well held by McGuinness when I was thinking about whether the tag the Cozzy last week, I wondered whether they would, and I couldn't think who might, but McGuinness was the obvious one. Obviously, I should have thought that. But his pressure, he was our fourth highest rated pressure player, 17 pressure acts and 44 pressure points. And Harry Sharp, Jack Steele, and Jake Bowie round up the 8th, 9th top 10. Offensively, so some of the key numbers I mentioned, disposal efficiency is almost the same, 75.6 to 74.9, but it's really one of the reasons I like the equity point model, because even though and increasingly thinking some of those numbers aren't much value, but even though, we're almost bang on the same for disposal efficiency. A reminder that our ball use, our points for impact, and that measures impact. The difference for ball use was 91.6 equity points to 59. So plus 32.7 reads a lot better than almost bang on the same for disposal efficiency. Kicking into forward, this was a big factor, I think. Kicking into forward 50 retention. So it really speaks to that data point that I said before about kicking long down the line. And I presume this picks up this as well. Kicking long into a forward 50 retention, or in this case, kicking into forward 50 retention. 56% of the time we kicked inside 50, we retained the footy. To there, only 36%. So plus 20 for that. That was a big factor in the win, I thought. And they struggled, I thought, defensively all match, and that retention inside 50 was a manifestation of that challenge. We're averaging 49.5%, so up on our season average. AFL average is 47.7% of the time teams retain the ball when they kick inside 50. So the Hawks were way under that, like 11.7% under the AFL average for retention into 50. It's not all down to Gunson either. So that would not have pleased Mitchell at all. He was a pretty grumpy looking bugger afterwards. Meters gained speaks to our direct style. Kick long, kick meters gained was 6,077. We're plus 503, plus half a kilometre meters gained by kicking. AFL average is 5,743, so 300 odd above, 330 odd above AFL average for kick meters gain. Really speaks to our model of being territory kick long. Overlap handball wasn't a big factor in this game. Handball meters gained 366. Our season average is 387. They're averaging 293, and they were 460 in this match, but it felt like they weren't getting impact, at least watching it, felt like they weren't getting impact from those meters gained by hand, and they really didn't seem to be able to get a flow. And I think, again, that speaks to our defensive work. I mentioned this before, but time in forward half, 48% to 52, essentially. We had one less inside 50 than them, so remarkable given the scoreline. We could have won by more in a way, but 39-point margin with one fewer inside 50 is very impressive, which is picked up in this stat. We had 4 more shots at goal, but our scores per inside 50 were 53.6%. They only scored 36.8% of the time when they went inside 50, and our goals for inside 50, 32.1% of the time we went inside 50, we scored a goal to their 21.1%. So, in many ways that shows the difference in terms of efficiency. I mean, it's really amazing after years of talking about, quote unquote, our efficiency going inside 50. We've been so much more efficient this season. And ironically, of course, as I've talked about a number of times, ironically, with a very similar methodology in the last handful of games, kicking long inside 50 and winning the ground ball, very much like we were playing in 21 and at times in 23, 24, when everyone was bemoaning our efficiency. We're just much better when the ball's hitting the ground. They've obviously got good plans and systems in place to do that. There was a question a bit in the for the Demonland podcast around the marks inside 50. So it was 9 to 15. Marks inside 50 are really a function. That gap is when you move it quickly. And so maybe, that's partly related to their handball meters gain. When you get that tic-tac, you drag the defenders up to the contest to create space out the back, and then you get space inside 50 for those easy sort of spot up marks. They had 15 of them. We had 9 transition. This was interesting, but I'll go into this in more depth in the why thing. But defensively, just to suffice to say, they are a really good transition side. We've been pretty good too this season, certainly up in the top third for most of the key metrics for that that measure transition. And again, was another big factor in the win, but I'll speak to that more in more detail in a sec. Expected score, another game. Every single game this season, our expected score has been above the actual score. So, sorry, our actual score has been above our expected score, well over in this game. Our expected score was 98.3. Our actual score was 120. Conversely, their expected score was 85.4. So we win that game by 13 points on expected score, but they could only manage 81 points. Pretty poor from them, given they're an excellent kicking side. And remarkable, really. That's 10 rounds, 10 games. Our score's been above expected score. The last 2 weeks, our opponent's actual score has been below the expected score, but all the other 8, the opposite is true. The chain score is a bit, as I've talked about, is a bit inside baseball, I think so. But the chain score is expected points scored based on the origin of a team's chain, including clearances, turnover, and kick-ins. I just wanted to highlight, and this goes to our effectiveness from stoppages, is the expected chain score from our stoppages was 15.3 points, and yet we scored 6 goals straight, 36. So plus 20.7 from our expected chain score from stoppages to our actual score. Super impressive. That was, 6 straight helps, obviously. But it was another factor in another big factor in our win. In terms of where the score sources were, 26 points from the centre bounce. We're averaging 14.1, so terrific in that space. They can only manage 6 points from centre bounces. Speaks to their ineffectiveness of their, of their setups in the centre and their ability to hurt us when they out of the centre. Teams are averaging against us this season 13.4, so they can only manage 6. They were 4th on the ladder or something before coming into this match. So you'd certainly be hoping, if you're a Hawks fan, be more impressive than that. So we did a good job defending when they did win centre bounces. Stoppages around the ground, 36 to 14. Turnover, 58 to 61. So that wasn't too bad. They didn't super punish us. So, but 61 of their points, a pretty high percentage of their points, obviously were turnovers. So what's that? They scored 90. So yeah, almost 2/3 of their score were from turnover. Interestingly, turnover is about 60 to 65, somewhere like that. Let's say 62 percent of across the AFL scores are from turnover. And I noted the last few weeks that dynamic's changed for us a little bit, where we're getting a really high percentage of our scores from stoppages. And so in this game, what was it? So 50-62 of our points were from centre bounce or around the ground stoppages, which means that over 50% of our score in this match were from stoppages. And again, it's sort of similar numbers to what we were putting up in 21, and when we were playing our best footy in that back half of 21, we're really hurting teams from stoppages. That's going to be an interesting watch, I think, whether that continues. We were plus 20, so we'll go to, I'll touch on that later. Let's say chain start region, as I said, 26 points from the centre bounce, season average 14. All right, so why we won, and a quick review of my preview. In the preview of last week's game, there were several questions I had to ponder, one of which was the impact of Windsor out. How much would that hurt us? I think I argued last week that I think we're well positioned to cover the loss of Windsor. My guess was Chin was going to go into the centre, Langdon would be pushed up to the wing, cross forward, and Rivers goes back to the halfback flank. And I was wrong on that. Rivers basically swapped out for Windsor and did a damn fine job in doing so. He was our, I think, I'll just check, he was our, see, the player ratings was really interesting in this game. He was our, let's see, what was his player rating? His player rating was 14.3, so he was our 5th highest rated player behind Kate Chandler, Maxi Gawn, Daniel Turner, Harrison Petty, and he was next. So 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth, sorry. Okay. Dead radio isn't me counting up numbers. Trent Rivers, 14.3, consistent right across, but in the second half, he was terrific. In particular, he had, of his 14.3 rating points, he averages is about 10, somewhere around 10 over his career. So really sort of great game, particularly given, he's been injured and out of the team for ages, and what was it, 1 or 2 games at Casey level. A really impressive performance from Trent. So we lost, I got my matchups wrong, but my main point was I thought we were well placed to cover the impact of Windsor being out, and I think that proved to be the case. Chin was left in his high half forward role, really, and Cross remained on the wing and Langdon remained at half back. So in many ways it was clever because for exactly that reason, all 3 of those players stayed in their position. So much less structural mixing up of things and players, having to get used to a new role for a little while. Excellent performance by Riv and a good, another example of smart coaching by King. Another question I put forward last week or pondered was how will the Hawks how will the Hawks go? How big will their struggle be covering their 2 bigs out, Gunston and Barrass, in such as the importance of their structure? And I would argue they struggle big time, which for me is a red flag for the Hawks, if I'm going to be brutally honest, because, of course they're important to their structure, but, in Barrass in particular, I would say in terms of their defensive structure, but, your defensive system needs to be able to stand up to having 1 or 2 players be taken out. I made the point on the Demonland podcast that one of the hallmarks of Goody's defensive system was so strong that if May, for instance, didn't play or Lever didn't play, and sometimes neither, is someone could come in and play those roles and the system would maintain its integrity. And I don't think they were really struggling. Weddle was poor. He looked all at sea. And so, that I think that they did struggle to cover, and they missed Gunston's footy IQ. I think they looked a bit all over the shop up forward line as well, and a bit rudderless. So they struggled, and I think to cover their 2 big outs. And I think it's a real worry for them, to be honest. It was driving me nuts. All of the post-match analysis was banging on about them. Hardly anyone, almost no one mentioned the fact that we've got way more best 23 players out, way more best 23 players out than them. And, Windsor is every bit as important to our system as Gunston is to theirs, I would argue, because he's been critical for us being so damaging from our centre clearances and his run and carry. And, he was a massive out, but obviously we've got Salem out, we've got Viney out, we've got Myercheck, who is arguably just as important to our forward structure as Gunston is to theirs, maybe not quite so much. Xavier Lindsay, who was playing an important role down back, he's out. So, Melk's out. There's we were much we're hit much harder by our best 23 outs than they were. So really frustrating to hear the overemphasis on Gunston and Barrass being out, but they did struggle to cover them, that's for sure. Another question I had to ponder was, do we lock anyone down with a tag? I mentioned that there were players we'd negate that I'd probably look to tag Newcomb, such as he's important, or maybe Ginnivan. But I did also say that, Colt probably has the leg speed and strength and nous to go with Watson, and he certainly would love to put the Colt lock on Watson, and that proved to be the case. He went to Watson and really negated. I mean, Watson kicked 3 goals, but he didn't have the influence on the game that he often does. He wasn't a fire starter type player. I watched Colt a fair bit through the binoculars, and he verbally barely stopped all game chipping into Watson's ear. So I thought that was hilarious, really, to be honest. So he did a great job at minimising the impact of Watson. I don't know whether we played in a gating role in Newcomb. He actually played pretty well. Ginnivan was probably the player that I don't think we really looked to shut him down. He wasn't particularly influential. Sort of leads me into key Hawks players to negate. I said last week were Eamon, Impey, Sicily, Newcomb, Ginnivan and Watson. And interestingly, really only of those players, Ginnivan was the one who was probably least effective, and Watson arguably too. But all the others, Eamon, Impey, Sicily, Newcomb, all had pretty good games as evidenced by the ratings. So Dylan Moore was their highest rated player, 19, but Sicily was next, 18.2. And it's one of the reasons I like the rating system, because I wouldn't have thought that just from watching live that he was that impactful. Jai Newcomb was their next rated player, third highest rated player for the Hawks, 18. So impressive game from him. I criticised Josh Weddle before, but he was next in line for the Hawks, 17.3. But in terms of Impey, he was down 11.5, and Eamon, they muddling games. They weren't as influential, I think, although they both had pretty close to their season average, and in Impey's case, a little bit more in terms of metres gained. So, their number, like their ratings, were better than I thought they played. I don't think they influenced the game as much. One of the questions I had was, how will we exploit Barras out? Will we play Max deep forward to create a match issue? Or maybe, is there a possibility we'll throw Harry Petty forward? And that's what we did. And we got a reward straight away, didn't we? So 3 first half goals to Pets, and that was a winner of a strategy. The other question I had was to press up or not press up. I thought that, like the Lions, the Hawks like to control the ball with kicking, so that kicking style and deliberate kicking until then they go. And I wondered whether, like we did against the Lions, we'd allow them to have those lateral kicks across the half back line, and set our defensive line really deep, and only press up to the logo. And at that point, when the Lions got and in this case the Hawks got to that point, apply that frontal pressure, make it hard for them to hit up. I thought that something we probably would do to help us avoid the trap of them getting out the back. That's how they like to engineer a lot of their goals, particularly Gunson and Wizard. As I noted last week, we employed a similar strategy against the Swans. We did have our defensive line deep, so we very much did do that. But I was a little bit, I'll speak to this in a sec, but I don't think we allowed them to have those kicks just easy. We really put a lot of energy into cutting off the easy switch, but also making sure that we smashed the receiver. So we didn't we pushed up a little bit higher, really, is the short version, than we did against the Lions, but our D was still quite deep, back shoulder, and we didn't give them that space out the back that, in particular, Watson could run into. So clever coaching. So how did we win? I said last week to win that we would need to do a number of things. First one, negate their transition and match them on transition. So defensive half to scoring percentage, which is the percentage of all chains starting in the defensive half that result in a score. Coming into this game, Hawks were number 1 ahead of Swans and Freo in terms of score percentage when transitioning from their defensive half, 16.2. We were number 6 coming into the game, 15.2. In this game, however, we won that stat. 17.1% of our chains from D50 resulted into a score. They were only 14.3. We were well above our season average. They were well below their season average, or a bit below their season average. So that was a big tick for us. Chain to score percentage, so percentage of all chains, disposal chains that result in possession, and disposal chains that result in a score. Hawks, as I noted last week coming into this game, score from 25.5% of their chains, number 1 in the AFL. It was critical that we disrupted that, which was what my point was about us making it hard for them to transition from their back half using those deliberate kicks. They're number 1 in the AFL, 25.5% of their chains result in a score. That's really very impressive. We're number 9. We were coming into this game, I'm not sure what we are now, but coming into the game, we were 9th, scoring from 22.6 of all of our chains. So it was something that we needed to at least equalise, but we did better than that. So in this game, we scored from 25.2% of our chains from our chains, and they were 18.6%. So again, they were well below, or even more below their season average. Well below. So they're 25.5% of their chains number one in the AFL before this game. They could only manage 18.6% in this game. So it really demonstrates how effective we were at disrupting their ball movement, but also how strong we were defensively when they did move it from the back half. Really terrific from that perspective. Number two, I thought, well, and for us to win, we really needed to win the clearance battle. We needed to win, in particular, the scores from clearances, the scores from stoppages battle. We certainly did that. We were 10 goals from clearances for the second time this season. We were plus 20 for scores from centre bounce. We were plus 22 from scores around the ground stoppages, meaning that in total we were plus 42 from all stoppages. That is off the charts nuts. That is unbelievable, particularly given, many had them up in the top 2 or 3 favourite for the Flags, and everyone was raving about them 3 weeks ago. Remember, they beat the Swans, so that is a big concern for them. So win the clearance and scores from stoppages battle. I said last week that we would have to do, and that we did. And as I said earlier, that we matched them roughly in turnover, so we're -3 in turnover, so they didn't hurt us particularly on turnover. Number 3, I said that in order for us to win, we need to match their physicality and contests. Absolutely no problems there. I talked through where our pre-clearance, post-clearance, and inside D50 before, but we were plus 11 for contested possessions, and we were plus 11, as I said, for contested possessions in D50. Absolutely matched their physicality and contest. In fact, even more than that. And in the third term, we use that physicality and contest to really impact the scoreboard. We scored 4 goals from 7 forward half intercepts in the third term, a huge factor, I thought, in getting us on top. Our pressure was brilliant in this match, 175 to 179, but it was really the critical 2 quarters was we were plus 13 for pressure in the second quarter and plus 16 for pressure in the third quarter. So we absolutely matched their physicality and contest. I thought for us to win, we needed to stretch their defence height-wise. We did that. Mentioned Petty went forward. That absolutely played it. Worked that tactical manoeuvre by King, and it really helps Langford pushing forward to create a mismatch and a real match-up challenge for opponents. Like Ollie Dempsey, it's the same sort of model tall winger who can run ahead of the ball and be a marking option inside 50. And he took a nice mark, which was, if you watch that play, it was a kick from Bowser. I think that was all day, every day. That was a set play. You watch Bowser. I was watching him in the binoculars. And if you watch all the goals, you can see it. He set that play up. Bowser. It was clearly a set play, and Langford ran to a designated spot, which was exactly the spot that he ran to against the Eagles forward pocket, running down, and got a mark last week against the Eagles. So finally, to win. So the fifth thing was to interrupt their ability to get their zone defence set up. Just one reason why they like a deliberate high disposable method is it allows them to get their defence right. They've been pretty good defensively before this week. There's that, the premiership window that you'll hear about on Fox or whatever. There are only 2 teams in it. And basically you have to have your defence sorted, offence sorted. So I think it's top 6 in defence, top 6 in offence. They were one of 2 teams, Sydney being the other, that were in that quadrant, in part because of their defensive strength. And we completely opened them up in this game, obviously. But the key to us sort of scoring on them is disrupting that zone defence. I thought we did that really well. Coming into the game, I thought to do so in the preview last week that we would, when we have the ball, go super quick, run at them, high handball meters game, not let Sicily, Eamon and Impey control the tempo of the game, deny intercepts and intercept marks. I was wrong about going super quick. We didn't do that. We didn't really run at them until the end. And I think that's sort of one of the interesting things, and I'll hark back to 21, is that so many games in 21, we held teams and played tough, contested footy, which is what we're doing. And then once they were buggered, basically, we're still running on top of the ground, and we were smashing teams in the second half and last quarter in 21. That's exactly what we're doing in this year. So we did go quick in the second half, and obviously in the last quarter we got our overlap run going, but that was a bit like once we'd cracked the nut, so to speak. So, we'd broken the back of the Hawks, and that's when we really looked to go quick. But before that, we were much more deliberate. We were kicking to contest. We weren't super quick. As I mentioned, we were really looking to stretch the ground wide. And when I saw them doing that early, that said to me that they don't think Hawthorn is a good enough running team, or they're not fit enough at the moment, because that's exactly what teams were doing to us last season and the season before, in particular Freo, who were just running us off our feet and making us chase and cover switches. And that, I thought that was really interesting. We really used the width of the G in a way that I haven't seen us do this year. We did it a bit last week, actually, against the Eagles, where we played a bit of keepings off against the Eagles. And I thought that we did that to conserve energy. But yeah, nonetheless, I think that we did a good job disrupting their zone. Despite, don't Sicily, Eamon and Impey, I don't think they did control the tempo of the game, despite the fact their player ratings were high, and but they weren't triggering those score involvements and those chains from the halfback, which is the key thing. Deny intercepts and intercept marks, we did that. So total intercepts, we actually had 2 more intercepts than them, 72-70. Intercept marks, beautiful. We had 15, they had 16, so only -1. So big tick for that. Big tick for all of these things. Finally, talk about this all season. The biggest, that thing that I talked about on the Demonland podcast, when asked about his opinion about our list in the interview process, King apparently said, well, I can't give you an opinion until I've seen their GPS number. And that really speaks to his philosophy. It speaks to the game plan, how central running power is. And in the, we are, it's like 21. We are fit at the moment. They're talking about our fitness. King is referencing our fitness in our high performance program in his post-match presses. And we're getting on top late in quarters, which is a sure sign that teams are fit. Often our pressure rating's highest in the last quarter, which is an absolute, it's one of the best correlations between optimal running power and fitness. You can't apply pressure if you're knackered. And scoring is obviously, as the game goes on, I think we're 140% or something I saw in last quarters. Really, really terrific stuff. But you can only do that when you're super fit, and you can only do that when you've got a fitness advantage. And I think we do, and I think we did over the Hawks. They are a running team, so really impressive. A real worry for the Hawks, I think. And that outscoring as evidence in the second half, we outscored the Hawks by 18 points from one fewer forward half intercept during that period. So 32-14 from forward half intercepts in that period, with one less of forward half intercepts. Again, that speaks to fitness. But after more around the score, after leading by just a goal at halftime, we just smashed them after halftime. We scored 12-6, 78 to 7-3, 45 in the second half. Amazingly, a really interesting stat is that, 27 more, we outscored them 78-48, so 27, 33 more points in the second half from 3 fewer inside 50s. They had 30 inside 50s in the second half. We only had 27, yet we put, nearly 6 goals more than, we kicked nearly 6 goals more than them. That really comes down to running power and just again more evidence of that. We've led at 3/4 time in 5 completed matches this season. We've won all 5 of them. Looking at the AFL app tracker, so that gives it has GPS data for every match, top 5s for things like total distance covered, average speed in attack, that's when we have the ball, average speed in defence when they have the ball, sprints, etc. It makes for interesting reading. We ran almost 300 kilometres again. Cross was the standout player in terms of some of that. He was our quickest in attack, most sprints, the fastest, and it speaks to always in the team essentially. That's the wrap up of that game. Fantastic performance by the D's, great win, and that's going to hold us in good stead when we're coming up almost an 8-point win, because we could well be competing with the Hawks for that top 6 side. I'm really hoping that we've got a big few weeks coming up. Top 6 is a realistic chance, I think. All right, well, I'm really sort of That took longer than I had planned for. Well, longer than I thought it would. I'm stopping planning altogether, really. So I'm going to jump to the preview. So, interesting game. I'm worried about this game. We've been up for now. I think we're 5-6 weeks. We targeted this game. You could just, no doubt, it's clear that the high performance program needs to target specific games. You could tell from what King was talking about that we targeted the Hawks game. So that means we played Brisbane. We targeted that game. The Dogs game, the Tigers game, the Swans game. We had a 5-day break in there. We had a 6-day break in there. Travel back from Adelaide at the beginning of that after gather round. That's a long way of saying that I think that it would be very understandable if the team's a bit flat in this game. So I think it's a huge, massive test. Just some of the the basics overview. Obviously, the weather's not a factor because that's going to be inside Docklands. Some of the profile numbers before I get into how they might beat us is the Dogs are really, really struggling. So it's a little bit funny with the data because after 4 rounds, they were, I think, second favourites to win the flag, and many people's tips, such was their dominance. But, they've had a number of injuries. It's hard to think that just the injuries explain this, but they've completely fallen off a cliff after round 4, and you could pick any sort of numbers. So their season average numbers are a bit all over the shop. So it's a bit hard to make meaning from them. So I think they were averaging 110 for the first 4 rounds. In the last 5 weeks, they're averaging average 0.4 in the last 5 matches is 70.8. The first 4 rounds of the season, their average points for was 110. That's 40 points less in the last 5 games. In the last 5 games, which is, I think, better to look at because it's, it picks up having no English, and obviously their injuries are impactful. Average in the last 5 games, the average losing margin is 41.3 points. That's against our average winning margin in that same time for that last 5 matches of 31.8. It speaks to a concern, obviously, for them. Look, they've got a lot of injuries, no doubt about it. Of their best 23, the obvious one is Tom Liberatore, huge out for them. Tim English, Cody Waitman, his best 23 out. Bailey Williams, and obviously Sam Darcy is probably the biggest one. And I guess Riley Garcia is another one who's in their best 23, who's not available, I don't think, although it's TBC, so maybe he'll get selected. Correlation and causation, those numbers have collapsed in all sorts of categories that correspond to Tim English not being in the team. So, whether how big a factor him being out is hard to tell, but it's not just, their best players. So, in terms of their key players, Bontempelli's obviously a key player, but he's clearly injured. He's clearly nowhere his best, nowhere near his best. They must be really caught betwixt and between whether to manage him, to rest him, or to keep playing him. But he's certainly not, playing at the level that he normally would. Dale's another one who's super important. He's averaging 18.8 kicks a game, 25.2 disposals. But he's sort of not been as impactful. And the other one that's a really big one, I think, is Richards as well, who is also seems to be carrying something and isn't having the impact. So they're big player, like obviously Darcy, of their best players, Darcy, English, I would argue their best players are Darcy, English, Bontempelli, not in any order, Richards and Liberatore. So you've got 3 of their best 5 players not playing, so obviously that's going to hurt. And in Richards and Bontempelli, you've got 2 of their best 5 players, not playing anywhere near their best footy. The betting in this game after we're $1.71 to win this game. The line is, what's the line? 5 points. The over unders is 190.5. If I don't bet on Melbourne games. Recommend not betting on anything. Don't bet. If you were to bet, the over-under in the last 5 games we've played, the last 8 games, the between Melbourne and the Bulldogs, the over TMP, total match points, has been it's gone over. But the Bulldogs, and I'll speak to this in a sec, how they're going to beat us. I can think the only way they can beat us is to try to make this an offensive, a real difficult defensive game and flood defence, play an extra in D or do something like that. Because if this gets into anything vaguely looking like a shootout, which is how they like to play when they're playing their best footy, then we're going to just hammer them, I think. So they won't want that. So 190 seems high. I think it's a real danger game, but geez, I would have had the line at probably 12, 15 points. So the line of 5.5 points is pretty good value, in my opinion. Some of the key numbers for this match in terms of head-to-head matchup, the contested possessions were slightly stronger. They're minus 4.7 per game differential against their opponent. Contested possessions, we're almost bang on. We're 0.2. They're winning more raw clearances. They're plus 2.3 clearances per game. We're only 0.5, but again, it's not about the number of clearances. It's about the damage done from those clearances. And again, 0.23 clearances is probably inflated by their first 4 games in which they were dominant. Since then, that's really dropped off in that aspect. From an attacking point of view, we're averaging 103 points a game. They're averaging 85.6. As I said, for the first 4 rounds, they were averaging 110. It's now down to 85. Points from turnover, big problem for them. We're averaging 54.6 from turnover, which is very healthy. That's very good. They're only averaging 43.1. Points from stoppages, this is critical. It's like I was saying, they're on differentials. They're winning. They're beating teams for raw numbers for clearances, plus 2.3. But the points from those clearances, we're averaging 43 points a game. They're only averaging 33.5 points. That's 10 points a game with no English. I don't know whether they'll run with, I presume in terms of ins and outs, I don't know yet, but I'm presuming that there'll be no change to last week, is my guess. And so from their perspective, with no English coming up against the 2 maxes, points from and with no Libba, and with a impacted Richards and Bontempelli, really Bontempelli's is not really providing any impact, or like I said, he's 99th at 100 for impact from stoppages in terms of scoring probability. So he's not giving them the bang for the buck. So I don't know what they'll do. They've got to find. They might bring extras up to the stoppage, for instance. For where they do have us, they're scoring from D50 to forward 50 percentage not scoring is slightly better than ours. We're having a few more shots. Scores per inside 50, they're quite efficient when they go inside 50, more efficient than us. So scores for inside 50, 46.6% of the time they score when they go inside 50. We're 45.1. Again, it's a little hard to know of how much that percentage is inflated when they had Darcy running around to kick it 2 up there. Awful to see him go out. I hate to see players injure themselves like that, particularly generational talents like him. I do wonder whether part of that, the psychology of that, they've struggled psychologically to sort of come up from that. And I think Libba out is more than just what they miss with his run around the ball. It's also, he's a talisman type player. He's a leader, on-field leader. I wonder the combination of having Darcy and how devastating that was. Obviously, English not there and Libba not providing that on-field leadership. For me, I think that's a sort of triumphant of challenges that the Dogs are struggling to overcome at the moment. Inside 50s are roughly the same, 52.7. We're averaging to 54.5, so they're slightly more than us in terms of that. So scores for inside 50, almost the same. Defending scores for inside 50 are almost the same. So the question really that I had in terms of, normally or every other show of how will we beat our opponent, and it comes back to this thing that I've talked about for a few weeks that I've been ruminating on, it's rolling around in my head, is what Simpson is, and he's been talking about it too. I think he's listening to this podcast. G'day, Simpson, Simo. I like it because the week after I was talking about the two different types of coaches. The system-focused coach who says, here's the way we play, like the Sydney and like Brisbane Lions this year, versus strategy where the approach is much more fluid and the tactical approach is much more fluid. The fundamentals are the same, but the way the team plays week in, week out changes depending on the opponent, the conditions, the planning. I would probably add in there the high performance program as well. That's interesting because Sydney are playing a particular way. And so you can think about, well, how you might tactically negate their strength. In their case, that handball meters gained and the overlap. What might you do? You bring up players to smash them on it, like I'm talking about frontal pressure. It's clear. Or if you've got a style where it's, for instance, under Goodwin and with Melbourne, where it's a defensive style, will move the ball fast. That was built. That method McRae built was to disrupt the Melbourne method of defensive stuff. It's really hard to know how to do that. On the ESPN footy podcast, which I listen to most weeks, that was one of their questions. The first question of the show was, well, why haven't teams gone to town on Melbourne, and why aren't one of the thoughts about Melbourne's success so far this year was, and why it's been surprising as well, maybe teams haven't put in time into them, which I think is just absurd, to be honest, as if an AFL team isn't going to be spending as much time as needed on working out their opponent. What they're actually talking about is Joe Public in the footy media. Well, Joe Public in the footy media aren't paid $1 million a year to coach an AFL footy team. So every other team would know our strengths and weaknesses. Every other team would know our major strength is our fitness and our running power. You can't do anything about that if you've not got that fitness and running power. The only thing you can do is slow it down. So the question was how to beat the Ds. Why haven't teams put in time to do it? The argument was, once teams work us out, quote unquote, well, we'll come back, we'll drop down a level because teams will work us out tactically. The issue we're definitely on the camp of, in the system versus strategy camp, a sort of dynamic. We're definitely 100%, as I've been talking about the last 3-4 weeks, we're in the strategy camp. We're in the Chris Scott Geelong strategy camp, and playing very similar footy to the way Cats are playing, I must say. Definitely a focus on contest, on intensity, and I think there's, as I said a number of times, that shell game thing. We're all going to be flash, outside running, overlap handballs, like we were in that Saints game. It's just not how we're playing footy. It's just simply not where we are a contest side. That's the fundamentals. And that's what they said on this show, SBN show, is they really, to be honest, gave a pretty nothing answer as how you beat Melbourne. What they said was Melbourne's all about winning the contest, all about kicking long, all about the ball hits the ground and winning the ground ball get, and being tough at it and, energetic and fun and creative and yada, yada, yada. All of which is sort of true, but it doesn't answer the question, well, how do you beat the Ds? And so when they did return to it, say, oh, well, beat them at the contest. It's easier said than done, and they're going to struggle to do so, the Dogs, obviously without Bontempelli firing, with Richards hampered by injury, and most of all, as I said, without Liberatore to get there into the coalface and win those hard ball. So how will they, how will we play? It's interesting. It tends a little bit about where we're at in our high performance program. In terms of the planning for that, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's just ridiculous. We don't have our bye to round 16, but that is as it is. I do wonder, I think Bevo will look to make this a low-scoring game, because I can't see how they think they can beat us if they allow this to get into anything, like I said before, anything vaguely like a shootout. They talk about SBN. SBN actually is what they said. The key thing they said was that we're all about chaos, and how do you take away chaos? How do you take away, it doesn't have to, they were accurate, and they referenced Hardwick, and they also, well, they didn't, but they could have as equally referenced Goodwin. As really, it doesn't have to be pretty footy. You just get it forward. It doesn't matter even if it's a inefficient disposal or it misses the target. If you make a mistake, go again. If the ball hits the ground, win that contest. That's really the simple thing. So for them to match this, they've got to match us in the stoppage. They've got to really do something about that points from stoppages. Otherwise, they've got absolutely no chance of beating us, I don't think. I think they'll play an extra back. I think they'll. Well, I can't see them wanting to getting into a ping pong up and down the ground, back and forth contest, because if they do, we'll win that contest, unless we're cooked. And if we're cooked, maybe that's what they'll do. I think clubs have a much better sense of where other teams are they cooked scale than obviously we do as fans. So if there's any sense that we're not switched on physically and mentally, then maybe they will run hard at us and try to exploit that. We'll know, 10 minutes into the game, we'll know, whether we are as fans watching, we'll know, are we coming to play? So I'm hoping it's a similar, I think we'll play in a similar way as we did to in the Eagles game, actually, where ideally we look to get a 4-5 goal lead and then play a version of keepings off. In terms of taking away the chaos, maybe the way they could do it is to use control, and the way Brisbane and Hawthorn like to do. But my question would be with their outs and also players like Bontempelli and Richard not playing their best footy. The thing about that control method is you've got to make sure you don't turn it over. And they're not defending turnover super well. 52.1 points from turnover. We're only giving up 50.8. So, we could hurt them there. I think it's going to tactically, they're going to struggle to find a way to beat us. And, I talked about this on the Binman podcast is, the benefit of the approach King's taken is there is no real one way we're playing. We're playing slightly differently every week. So we're a moving target in terms of coaches, opposing coaches trying to work out what tactics they should employ to mitigate our strengths and weaknesses, because, one of our strengths is the chaos we're playing. How do you mitigate, chaos? So I'm confident that if we come and we're not mentally, physically flat of winning this game, but it does worry me. I think it's got all the sort of makeup of, given the weeks in the lead up to it, I think it would be really understandable if the team is flat. So I'm really looking forward to this game. I'll even sort of embrace going to the Docklands, although to fans, a bit of FYI, there's disruptions. So I come in on the Werribee line and I've got to get a bus. I hate it. Can't stand it. So, have a look at your journey planners and whatnot, because I think there's all sorts of train lines that are disrupted, buses on different train lines. Looking forward to it. 3:15. Hopefully we'll get a win. I'll be really happy if we bank the 4 points. I think 5 points. A point line seems too short to me. I'd be happy if we come out of this game with a 10, 11, 12-point win. Of course, I'll be thrilled if we turn it on and we smash them. It's going to be interesting with percentage is going to be a big factor, isn't it? So I've done a little bit of looking at the sort of top six, the benefits of the top six. It's huge benefit of finishing top six. You get it that week's break. If finished top six, the wildcard round replaces the pre-bye round essentially, but the top six sides still get the pre-bye round. So if we finish top six, let's say hypothetically we finish sixth, then we play a team that's come through that wildcard round. So they haven't had a week's break and we will have had a week's break. So really important to get the 4 points. Percentage is a total bonus, but I'd just be happy if we bank the 4 points and I walk away from the Docklands and are able to go home and watch the replay, and we'll talk about it next week, unpack it on the Demonland podcast, and I look forward to next week's review of this game and preview of our annual game at the at Alice Springs. Thanks for listening. I've been Binman.
That was Binman with the Stats Files. Don't forget to check out my interview with D's midfielder Tom Sparrow. I had a chat with him about the breakout year that he's having, the journey that brought him to this point, the challenges along the way, and what it means to already have had his name forever etched in Melbourne Football Club history as part of the club's drought-breaking premiership side. The Demonland podcast will return live on Monday night at 8 p.m. on demonland.com to dissect the match against the Bulldogs at Marvel. See you then. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's an emblem for me and for you. Well, it's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Well, every heart beats true for the red and the blue, as we sing a song for you. Should old acquaintance be forgot? Keep your eye on the red and the blue. Where the team played fine in the year 39. We're the team that no one can lick. And you'll find us there after the final bell with the spirit of 1926. Every heart beats true for the red and the blue, as we sing this song to